The photo showed my entire family toasting champagne on a yacht in the Bahamas, while I sat in my Chicago kitchen staring at my phone screen. I took action that same night. 9 hours later, my daughter-in-law Jessica was screaming so loud, the neighbors called the police. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. I'd like your support as I share what really happened when family loyalty met its match. Let me take you back to how this all started, because sometimes the sweetest revenge comes from people who underestimate exactly who they're dealing with. It was December 28th when Jessica had cornered me in my own kitchen, her voice dripping with that fake sweetness she'd perfected over 3 years of marriage to my son Stephen. "Margaret, about the New Year's trip to Nassau, I'm so sorry, but there's just not enough space on the yacht. It's really more for younger people anyway, you know? All that dancing and late-night partying. You'd be miserable." I'd simply nodded and smiled, the way I'd been doing for years whenever Jessica decided what was best for me. "Of course, dear. I understand completely." The words tasted like ash in my mouth, but I'd learned to swallow them. "I knew you would," she'd gushed, already backing toward the door like she couldn't wait to escape my presence. "You're always so reasonable about these things. Stephen and I really appreciate how flexible you are." Flexible. That's what they called it when I quietly accepted being excluded from family events, forgotten at birthdays, left out of holiday plans. Flexible meant I never complained when Jessica scheduled Sunday dinners during my book club, or when she planned the grandchildren's birthday parties for times I couldn't attend. Flexible meant being grateful for whatever scraps of attention they threw my way. But that photo changed everything. There was Stephen, my son, laughing with his arms around Lily and Tyler, my beautiful grandchildren. There was Jessica's mother, Patricia, who I'd met exactly twice at awkward family gatherings. Jessica's sister, Caroline, with her 3 kids I barely knew existed. Even Jessica's cousin, Mark, and his girlfriend, people I'd never heard mentioned before this moment. 37 people on that yacht. I counted them twice. Then 3 times to be absolutely sure. 37 people who somehow fit just fine. But not me. Not the woman who'd raised Stephen alone after his father walked out. Not the grandmother who babysat every weekend for 2 years when money was tight. Not the mother-in-law who'd bitten her tongue through countless passive-aggressive comments about my cooking, my clothes, my very existence. I studied every face in that photo, memorizing the joy I'd been deemed too old to share. The sunset behind them painted everything in shades of gold, like a perfect postcard from the life I wasn't allowed to live. That's when I set my phone down very carefully and walked to my study. The room that Jessica had never been allowed to enter, the one she assumed was just storage for my late husband Robert's old papers and outdated furniture. If only she knew what those papers actually contained. I opened my laptop and began typing. By morning, I owned 49% of Brennan & Associates Marketing, the agency where Jessica was senior partner. By noon, I'd scheduled a comprehensive audit for January 2nd. But that was just the beginning of what would become the most satisfying week of my life. The morning after I saw that photo, I woke up at 5 a.m. with the kind of clarity I hadn't felt in years. For the first time since Robert died 3 years ago, I had a purpose that had nothing to do with being the perfect grandmother or the agreeable mother-in-law who never caused trouble. I made coffee in my favorite mug, the cheerful yellow one Jessica always said was too bright for company, and sat in Robert's old leather chair. Everything in my house was wrong, according to Jessica. The curtains were too heavy, the furniture too traditional, my cooking was a bit old-fashioned for modern palates. Even my choice of television shows was somehow evidence of my inability to keep up with the times. My phone buzzed with a text from Stephen. "Having amazing time. Weather perfect. Kids love snorkeling. Wish you could see Tyler's face underwater. He looks like a little fish." Wish you could see, not wish you were here. The distinction was subtle but clear. I was welcome to enjoy their experiences secondhand through photos and stories, but not to actually participate in making memories with my own grandchildren. No mention of missing me. No apology for the sudden change in plans that had left me spending New Year's Eve alone with a frozen dinner and Dick Clark's Rockin' Eve. Just cheerful updates from the family vacation I'd been deemed too old and boring to enjoy. I poured my coffee and opened my laptop again, feeling a smile tug at my lips. Robert had left me very well provided for, though Jessica and Stephen had no idea exactly how well. They knew about the life insurance, the pension, the house that was paid off. They didn't know about the investment portfolio Robert had been building since we married, or the quiet stock acquisitions I'd been making for the past 20 years, while they assumed I was just a helpless widow learning to balance a checkbook. My husband had been a brilliant financial strategist, and he'd taught me everything he knew during our 45 years together. While Jessica saw me as a lonely old woman who needed their charity visits and pity invitations to feel included, I'd been watching, learning, and methodically building wealth they couldn't imagine. Brennan and Associates had been struggling lately. I'd overheard enough hushed conversations between Stephen and Jessica to know they were losing clients, behind on payments, and scrambling to maintain the lifestyle they'd grown accustomed to. Jessica's Mercedes lease, the house in Lincoln Park with its ridiculous mortgage, Tyler's private school tuition, Lily's elite dance academy fees, it all cost money they didn't quite have but pretended they did, which made my offer to purchase nearly half their business through an offshore investment firm impossible to refuse, especially since I'd had my lawyer structure it as a silent partnership from a company called Meridian Holdings. They'd never suspect that Margaret Brennan, the sweet old lady who made too much food and asked too many questions about their lives, was now their business partner with access to every financial record. The irony was absolutely delicious. Jessica, who'd spent 3 years telling me I didn't understand modern business or technology, had just sold me control of her professional life without even knowing it. The audit was scheduled for January 2nd. But I wasn't waiting for others to uncover what I suspected about Jessica's business practices. I'd been married to an accountant for 45 years. I knew how to read financial statements, and I definitely knew when numbers didn't add up the way they should. It took me exactly 6 hours of reviewing Brennan and Associates' books through my new partner access to find the first major discrepancy. Jessica had been billing clients for premium marketing packages while delivering basic services, pocketing the difference in a separate account that didn't appear on any official company records. Clever, but not nearly clever enough to hide from someone who actually understood financial forensics. By New Year's Eve, while my family was presumably dancing under tropical stars without a thought for the grandmother they'd left behind, I'd discovered 3 different schemes Jessica had been running for over 18 months. Overcharging nonprofit clients who trusted her completely, double billing for marketing materials that were produced once but charged for twice, and my personal favorite, charging her business lunches with her personal trainer Marcus to the company's client entertainment budget. Marcus Thompson, who according to his very public Instagram account was 28 years old with the kind of stunning physique that graced romance novel covers. The same Marcus who'd been tagged in dozens of Jessica's photos over the past 6 months, always during times when Stephen was supposedly away on business trips or working late at his law firm. I screenshotted everything methodically, building a case that would have made Robert proud. Every cozy dinner with Marcus at expensive restaurants across town, while Stephen thought Jessica was attending marketing conferences. Every afternoon, yoga session that somehow lasted 3 hours and took place at luxury hotels. Every weekend, business trip to Milwaukee that didn't involve any actual business meetings, since I'd already confirmed with the supposed clients that no such meetings had ever been scheduled. The beautiful thing about people who underestimate you is how careless they become. Jessica had never bothered to make her social media private, because who would grandmother Margaret know on Instagram? She certainly hadn't expected me to create an account and spend months quietly following her activities, watching her document her own infidelity with the kind of detail that would make a private investigator weep with joy. My phone buzzed with another family group text. This time, it was Jessica herself. "Sunset cruise tonight. Kids are having such a blast. Thanks for understanding about the space issue, Margaret. You're such a sweetheart." Understanding. I was becoming quite excellent at understanding things Jessica thought I'd never figure out. Like understanding that she was stealing from clients to fund her affair. Understanding that she viewed me as too stupid and irrelevant to pose any threat. Understanding that she was about to learn exactly how wrong she'd been about both my intelligence and my capacity for strategic thinking. I typed back, "Have wonderful time. Can't wait to hear all about it when you get back." Can't wait was the most honest thing I'd said to her in months. January 1st was a Tuesday, which meant Jessica and Stephen would fly back Wednesday evening exhausted and sunburned, and Thursday morning would bring Jessica face to face with exactly how much trouble she was really in. I spent New Year's Day in a way I hadn't in years, completely focused on myself and my own goals instead of worrying about what everyone else needed from me. I got my hair done at the salon I'd been going to for 2 decades, but hadn't visited since Robert's funeral. Susan, my stylist, took one look at me and shook her head with the kind of professional disappointment that came from watching a client give up on herself. "Margaret Brennan, you look like you've been hiding from the world for 3 years. When's the last time you did something just for you instead of everyone else?" "Today," I said, settling into her chair and feeling something inside me straighten for the first time in months. "Today I'm doing everything for me." 3 hours later, I walked out with silver hair, styled in a way that made me look 10 years younger and completely in control of my own life. Next stop was the department store, where I'd been buying practical sweaters and sensible shoes for far too long, clothes that made me invisible in family photos and easy to forget at family gatherings. The young sales associate, probably about Lily's age, lit up when I explained what I needed. "You want power clothes? Like CEO power or courtroom power?" "Boardroom power," I said without hesitation. "The kind that makes people nervous when you walk into a room." She understood the assignment perfectly. And by the time we were finished, I had 3 suits that cost more than I'd spent on clothes in the past 2 years combined. But when I looked in the dressing room mirror, I didn't see Grandmother Margaret anymore. I saw the woman who'd co-built a successful accounting firm with her husband, the woman who'd managed their investments through 3 economic downturns while raising a son and working full-time, the woman who'd volunteered at the Children's Hospital for 15 years and still found time to serve on 2 nonprofit boards. I saw the woman I'd been before grief and loneliness had convinced me to accept crumbs from people who should have been offering me the whole cake. My phone rang as I was loading shopping bags into my car. Stephen calling from the airport. "Hey Mom, we're boarding now. Should be home around 9 tonight. Jessica's exhausted from all the sun and activities, so we probably won't come by tonight. But maybe lunch Thursday?" "Actually, Stephen, I have plans Thursday, important business meetings, but I'm sure I'll see Jessica very soon." There was a pause. I never had plans that conflicted with their schedule. I never had business meetings. I never had anything they considered important enough to work around. "Oh, okay. Well, maybe this weekend then? We'll see how this week goes," I said, starting my car and feeling powerful in a way I'd forgotten was possible. Thursday morning arrived gray and cold, typical January in Chicago, but I woke up feeling like spring was coming early this year. I put on my new charcoal gray suit, made coffee in my favorite mug, and sat in Robert's chair to wait for the phone calls I knew were coming. The first call came at 8:47 a.m., right on schedule. "Mrs. Brennan, this is David Chen from Morrison & Associates. We're the accounting firm conducting the audit at Brennan & Associates Marketing. Could you come in today to discuss some significant concerns that have come to light during our review?" I'd hired David myself through my lawyer, but Jessica didn't know that crucial detail. To her, he was just another man in an expensive suit asking uncomfortable questions about business practices she thought she'd hidden perfectly. "Of course," I said, injecting just the right amount of concern into my voice. "What time works best for your schedule? Would 2 p.m. be convenient? And Mrs. Brennan, given the nature of what we've discovered, you might want to bring legal representation. I'll be there promptly at 2. The second call came at 10:23 a.m. Stephen, sounding confused and more than a little worried about whatever chaos was unfolding at his wife's supposedly successful business. "Mom, something really weird is happening at Jessica's office. There are auditors there asking pointed questions about missing money and financial irregularities. Jessica's completely freaking out. She thinks someone's trying to sabotage the business deliberately." "How terrible," I said, sipping my coffee and admiring the way the morning light hit my newly styled hair in the hall mirror. "I hope she figures out what's causing these problems. She's convinced it's some kind of mistake or misunderstanding. The auditors are asking about phantom clients and doctored invoices, but Jessica said she's never seen anything like what they're describing." That was interesting and completely predictable. Jessica was already preparing her innocent victim act, claiming complete ignorance about financial irregularities she'd personally created and managed for over a year. Classic Jessica, blame everyone else when consequences finally arrived at the door. These things usually work themselves out, I said, with the kind of calm wisdom that came from knowing exactly how this particular situation would resolve. I'm sure Jessica will handle everything professionally. After Stephen hung up, I spent the morning preparing for the afternoon's performance. I'd be playing the role of concerned business partner, shocked and disappointed to discover my investment had been placed in such an ethically questionable enterprise. At 1:30 p.m., I drove to the downtown office building that housed Brennan and Associates, a gleaming tower that probably cost more per month in rent than most people earned in salary. I'd never been there before. Jessica had never invited family to see her workplace. Too personal, she'd always said. Now I understood the real reason for her secrecy. The offices were impressive in exactly the way that screamed desperation rather than success. Expensive furniture that looked like it belonged in a magazine. Original artwork that probably cost more than my car. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Grant Park. All funded by money, Jessica had been systematically stealing from clients who trusted her with their marketing budgets and business dreams. David Chen was waiting for me in the conference room, looking appropriately serious and professional. Behind him sat Jessica, her vacation tan now looking more like the color of panic and embarrassment. Stephen was there too, holding Jessica's hand like she was the victim instead of the perpetrator of whatever was unfolding. "Mrs. Brennan," David said, standing as I entered and giving me the kind of respectful nod that successful women recognize. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." Jessica looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes that I suspected had more to do with fear than genuine emotion. "Margaret, what are you doing here? Did Stephen call you to come support us?" I took the seat directly across from her and opened my new leather briefcase, a lovely piece I'd bought specifically to match my transformation from invisible grandmother to serious businesswoman. "Actually, Jessica," I said with a smile that felt like victory, "I'm here as your business partner." The silence in that conference room was absolutely beautiful, the kind of perfect quiet that comes right before everything changes forever. Jessica's mouth fell open like a fish gasping for air on a dock. Stephen looked from me to Jessica to David Chen, trying to piece together a puzzle he didn't even know existed until this moment. "Business partner?" Jessica's voice was barely a whisper, like saying the words too loudly might make this nightmare more real. "What are you talking about, Margaret?" David Chen opened his folder with the kind of practiced efficiency that comes from delivering bad news to people who thought they were untouchable. "Mrs. Brennan is the primary investor behind Meridian Holdings, the company that purchased 49% of Brennan and Associates in December. She's here to review the serious irregularities we've discovered in the company's financial records." I watched Jessica's face cycle through confusion, disbelief, and finally dawning horror as she realized what had actually happened. Her sweet, bumbling mother-in-law, the woman she'd left behind because there wasn't enough space for old people on family vacations, was now her business partner, her judge, and quite possibly her professional executioner. "This has to be some kind of mistake," Jessica said, her voice rising with the kind of panic that made people say stupid things. "Margaret, you don't know anything about business or investments or modern technology. Someone's obviously taken advantage of you." "Oh, Jessica," I said, pulling out the first file folder from my briefcase with deliberate slowness. "I know quite a lot about business. I helped Robert build his accounting firm from absolutely nothing. I've been managing our investment portfolio for over 20 years with consistent profits, and I know exactly what I bought when I purchased half of your company." Stephen found his voice, though it sounded strangled. "Mom, what's going on? Why didn't you tell us you were investing in Jessica's company?" "Because I wanted to surprise you both," I said, smiling at Jessica with the kind of warmth that made my next words even more devastating. "And because I wanted to see firsthand what kind of business my daughter-in-law really ran when she thought no one was watching." David cleared his throat professionally. "Mrs. Brennan, we need to discuss the discrepancies we've uncovered. There's substantial evidence of systematic overbilling, phantom client charges, and personal expenses fraudulently charged to business accounts over an extended period." Jessica's face went white, then gray, then an interesting shade of green. "Those are accounting errors, simple mistakes that can be corrected with better bookkeeping procedures." "Can they?" I opened my folder and spread the documents across the polished conference table like cards in a winning hand. Bank statements, invoices, credit card receipts, Instagram screenshots, printed in full color. Because everything here looks quite deliberate and carefully planned to me. Jessica stared at the evidence of her crimes, laid out like a roadmap of betrayal and stupidity. Stephen leaned forward, reading invoice amounts, recognizing charges for restaurants he'd never been to, trips he'd never taken, experiences he'd never shared with his wife. Jessica, he said slowly, his voice getting quieter with each word. These charges. This receipt says you had dinner at Le Bernardin in New York last month. But you told me you were at a client meeting in Milwaukee. Stephen, I can explain everything. With Marcus Thompson, I added helpfully, pointing to the credit card receipt with my manicured finger. Your personal trainer, who, according to his very public social media accounts, was definitely not in Milwaukee that day. The last piece of color drained from Jessica's face as she realized I knew about Marcus, knew about the affair, knew about everything she thought she'd hidden so carefully. Stephen looked at the Instagram screenshots I'd printed out in devastating detail. Jessica and Marcus at intimate dinners, Jessica and Marcus at a resort spa weekend, Jessica and Marcus in what was clearly a hotel room, looking very much like people who weren't discussing fitness routines. How long? Stephen's voice was barely audible, like he was afraid of the answer. Jessica started crying. Real tears this time, not the crocodile tears she'd perfected for getting her way in family discussions. Stephen, it's not what it looks like. I can explain everything. But we all knew exactly what it looked like. And explanations weren't going to change the photographic evidence spread across the table. David Chen coughed discreetly. Perhaps we should focus on the financial irregularities first. Mrs. Brennan, as the majority stakeholder, what would you like us to do with this information? I looked at Jessica, remembering every dismissive comment, every excluded invitation, every time she'd made me feel like I was too old, too irrelevant, too much trouble to include in my own family's life. Every time she'd patted my hand and told me I wouldn't understand modern things, modern business, modern life. I think, I said carefully, savoring each word, we need to discuss Jessica's immediate resignation from the company she's been systematically embezzling from. And then we need to talk about restitution for the clients she's defrauded. Jessica's sobs echoed off the conference room walls, but all I could hear was the sound of 37 people laughing on a yacht I'd been deemed too old to enjoy. Jessica's attorney arrived 40 minutes later, a sharp-dressed woman named Patricia Wells, who clearly specialized in damage control for wealthy clients who'd made spectacularly bad decisions. She took one look at the evidence spread across the conference table, and her professional smile flickered for just a moment before she regained her composure. My client admits to some bookkeeping irregularities, she began, setting down her briefcase with the kind of confidence that came from charging $500 an hour. But these appear to be honest mistakes that can be rectified through adjusted payments and improved oversight procedures. I almost laughed out loud. After 3 years of being treated like I couldn't understand a restaurant menu, watching Jessica's lawyer try to snow me with legal double talk was almost entertaining. Almost. Honest mistakes, I repeated, pulling out another folder I'd prepared specifically for this moment. Like honestly mistaking client funds for personal vacation money, or honestly mistaking business dinners for romantic getaways with employees young enough to be your son. Stephen was staring at Jessica like he'd never seen her before, like she was a stranger wearing his wife's face. Jess, just tell me the truth for once. How long have you been seeing Marcus? It's not an affair, Jessica said quickly, her voice taking on that desperate quality of someone whose lies were crumbling faster than she could build new ones. He's helping me develop a fitness program for the company wellness initiative. I slid a hotel receipt across the table, watching Jessica's eyes track it like it was a snake. The Ritz-Carlton charges quite a lot for wellness initiatives, especially the presidential suite for 3 nights. Patricia Wells cleared her throat with the kind of professional authority that was supposed to intimidate people who didn't know better. Mrs. Brennan, what exactly are you hoping to accomplish here? Public humiliation? Because my client has children to consider, a family that could be destroyed by vindictive actions. Your client should have considered her children before she started stealing from her business partners and conducting affairs in hotel rooms, I said, my voice staying perfectly calm despite the rage I felt building. But since you asked what I want, I'll tell you exactly. I want full restitution of every penny of embezzled funds. Jessica's immediate resignation from all company positions, a formal apology to every client she defrauded, and a guarantee she'll never work in marketing in Chicago again. That's impossible, Jessica gasped, her tears flowing freely now. I built this company from nothing. You can't just take it away from me. Actually, I can. I opened my briefcase again and pulled out the document I'd been saving for this exact moment. David, would you please explain the current ownership structure to Mrs. Brennan? David Chen consulted his notes with the thoroughness of a man who'd been paid very well to be completely accurate. As of yesterday's emergency board meeting, Mrs. Margaret Brennan now owns 73% of Brennan and Associates. The additional shares were purchased from investors who were, shall we say, concerned about the company's ethical standards once they learned about the financial irregularities. Jessica's face went from white to green, like she was about to be physically sick. You bought out the other investors? How is that even possible? People don't like working with thieves, Jessica. Amazing how quickly they wanted to sell their shares once they understood what kind of person you really are and what you'd been doing with their money. Stephen stood up abruptly, walking to the window like he needed air, his shoulders shaking with what might have been rage or grief or both. Patricia Wells tried a different approach, her voice taking on a more conciliatory tone. Mrs. Brennan, surely we can reach some accommodation that doesn't involve destroying a family? Think about the children who will suffer if this becomes public. The family was destroyed the moment your client decided I wasn't worth including in it, I said, my voice carrying 3 years of accumulated hurt and anger. I'm just the cleanup crew. The next morning, I was having coffee in my kitchen, enjoying the first peaceful breakfast I'd had in months, when Stephen arrived unannounced, looking like he hadn't slept in days. Which was probably accurate, given that Jessica had spent the night at her sister's house and he'd been left alone with 2 confused children and the wreckage of his marriage. Mom, we need to talk. Of course, sweetheart. Coffee? I poured him a cup without waiting for an answer, noting how his hands shook slightly when he reached for it. He sat at the kitchen table where he'd eaten breakfast for 18 years before college, back when life was simpler and I was just his mother instead of his wife's nemesis. I don't understand any of this. When did you become this person? Which person would that be? The person who secretly buys companies and destroys marriages. The person who plots revenge like some kind of corporate assassin. His voice was raw with exhaustion and grief and something that might have been betrayal. I poured my own coffee and sat across from him, studying his face and seeing so much of his father in the set of his jaw when he was upset. I became this person when your wife decided I was too old and irrelevant to include in family vacations. I became this person when she spent 3 years treating me like a burden she had to tolerate instead of family she chose to love. So you decided to ruin her life? I decided to stop letting her ruin mine. I reached across the table and took his hand, feeling how cold his fingers were. Stephen, I found out about Marcus and the embezzlement because I was investigating why she excluded me from the trip. I was trying to understand if I'd done something wrong to deserve being left behind. He was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee like it might have answers. The money stuff. Is it really as bad as it looks? Could she go to jail? Worse than it looks. She's stolen over $200,000 from clients over the past 18 months. Some of them are small non-profits who trusted her with their entire marketing budgets. She could absolutely face criminal charges. Stephen put his head in his hands, and I could see the moment when the full reality hit him. What about Lily and Tyler? How do I explain to my kids that their mother is a thief and a cheat? You tell them the truth in age-appropriate ways. You protect them from adult problems while being honest about adult consequences. You focus on being the parent they can count on. Jessica wants to fight this. Her lawyer thinks they can prove you manipulated the situation to hurt her deliberately, that this is all about revenge instead of justice. I sipped my coffee, thinking about how to respond in a way that would help my son understand. Stephen, do you remember when you were 12 and you stole money from my purse to buy comic books? Yeah, but what does that have to do with, do you remember what I told you when I found out? He was quiet, then nodded slowly. You said that stealing wasn't wrong because I got caught. It was wrong because I did it in the first place. Jessica didn't get caught doing something wrong. She got caught doing something illegal that hurt innocent people. There's a significant difference. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Margaret, please don't destroy my family over a misunderstanding. The children need stability more than anything right now." I showed Stephen the message. "What do you think I should say to that?" "I think," he said slowly, his voice getting stronger, "you should ask her where her concern for the children was when she was having an affair and stealing money to pay for it." I was proud of my son in that moment. He was still hurting, still processing the betrayal, but he was seeing clearly through Jessica's manipulation. "The company will survive this," I said. "The clients will be repaid every penny. The employees will keep their jobs. But Jessica's days of calling the shots in this family are completely over." Friday brought Jessica's counterattack, and I had to admire her strategy even as I prepared to demolish it completely. She arrived at my house at 7 a.m. with Lily and Tyler in tow, clearly hoping their presence would prevent me from speaking plainly about her crimes and character. "Margaret," she said, her voice dripping with wounded dignity as she stood on my front porch, "I've come to apologize for any misunderstandings about the business finances. Stephen and I would like to work this out as a family, the way families should." Lily, my beautiful 15-year-old granddaughter, looked confused and tired. Tyler, 13 and always too smart for his own good, looked suspicious of everything about this early morning visit. "Grandma," Lily said, "Mom says you're upset about some business stuff and that's why Dad slept in the guest room last night. Can't you guys just work it out like adults?" Jessica shot me a look that clearly said, "Try explaining embezzlement and adultery to a teenager, you heartless old witch." "Sweetheart," I said carefully, "sometimes adults make poor financial and personal decisions that hurt other people. When that happens, there are consequences that can't be avoided just because we want things to go back to normal." Tyler frowned, his analytical mind already working on the problem. "What kind of poor decisions?" Jessica jumped in quickly, her voice honey-sweet with maternal concern. "Nothing that can't be fixed with better communication and oversight. Just boring business stuff that adults sometimes disagree about." I looked at my grandchildren, these kids I adored more than anything, and made a decision about honesty versus protection. "Tyler, Lily, would you like some breakfast? I was just making pancakes and bacon." "Can we talk privately while they eat?" Jessica asked, her mask of sweetness slipping slightly. "Of course." In my study, surrounded by Robert's books and the evidence of Jessica's crimes, she dropped all pretense of family unity. "What's it going to take, Margaret? Money? A public apology? What do you want to make this go away?" "I want you to stop lying to your children. I'm protecting them from adult problems. You're protecting yourself from consequences." I sat behind Robert's old desk, feeling his strength supporting me from beyond the grave. "You want to know what I really want, Jessica? I want you to understand that actions have consequences. Fine. I made some mistakes. I'll pay back the money and end things with Marcus." "With what money? The funds you embezzled are gone. Spent on hotel rooms and jewelry and maintaining a lifestyle you couldn't afford on your actual salary." Jessica's mask finally slipped completely, revealing the rage underneath. "You sanctimonious old witch. You think you're so perfect, sitting in your dead husband's chair, judging everyone else's life choices. There it is," I said softly. "The real Jessica, the one who's been hiding behind fake sweetness for 3 years. You want to know the truth? Want to? Stephen felt sorry for you. You were this pathetic widow who couldn't figure out how to live without someone taking care of her every need. We included you out of pity. Each word was designed to wound. And 3 years ago, they would have destroyed me completely. But 3 years ago, I hadn't discovered my own power or learned to value myself independent of their approval. Are you finished? We gave you purpose, Margaret. Without us, you're just a lonely old woman with too much time and money and nothing meaningful to do with either." I opened my laptop, pulling up the document I'd prepared for this exact moment. "Speaking of money, would you like to see your final severance package?" The screen showed exactly what Jessica would be walking away with. Nothing. No severance, no benefits, no references, no future in Chicago marketing. Just a lawsuit if she tried to work anywhere in the city. "You can't do this to me. Actually, as the owner of 73% of the company, I can do exactly this and more." From the kitchen came the sound of my grandchildren laughing at something on their phones. Normal kids dealing with an abnormal situation, created entirely by their mother's choices. Those children are going to need therapy because of what you're doing to this family, Jessica said. No, I replied. They're going to need therapy because of what you did to this family. I'm just making sure they understand the difference between actions and consequences. Sunday afternoon brought the surprise I hadn't been expecting, though perhaps I should have seen it coming. Jessica arrived with Marcus Thompson, her personal trainer turned affair partner, and two people I didn't recognize, a man in an expensive suit and a woman with a professional camera. Margaret, Jessica announced like she was delivering a subpoena, I'd like you to meet my attorney, James Morrison and Patricia Wells from Channel 7 News. We're here to discuss your elder abuse situation. I was still in my gardening clothes, having spent the morning planting bulbs for spring flowers I might actually be around to enjoy now that I had reasons to look forward to the future. How interesting. What's the occasion? We're here to discuss the financial manipulation you've been subjected to, James Morrison said, pulling out his tablet with the confidence of a man who thought he was about to expose a scandal. Ms. Brennan has evidence that you've been taken advantage of by unknown parties seeking to exploit your grief and isolation. I almost admired the strategy, even as I prepared to destroy it completely. Paint me as a confused old woman being manipulated by mysterious financial predators. Turn Jessica into the victim of elder abuse rather than the perpetrator of embezzlement and adultery. It was actually quite clever. Elder abuse, I repeated slowly. By myself? Patricia Wells stepped forward with her microphone, her voice dripping with the kind of synthetic concern that made for good television. Mrs. Brennan, are you aware that your recent business investments may have been influenced by individuals seeking to exploit your grief over your husband's death and your social isolation? What individuals would those be? Exactly. We believe, James Morrison said, consulting his notes like he was reading from a script, that you've been targeted by financial predators who convinced you to invest in schemes specifically designed to hurt your daughter-in-law's business as part of some kind of revenge plot. Marcus Thompson stood slightly behind Jessica, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. Smart man. He was about to become the face of adultery on the evening news. So your theory, I said slowly, letting my amusement show, is that I'm too stupid to manage my own money or make my own decisions. Not stupid, Patricia Wells said in her most sympathetic television voice. Vulnerable, grieving, possibly suffering from early cognitive decline that makes you susceptible to manipulation by unscrupulous individuals. That was the moment I realized Jessica had made her biggest mistake yet. She was so desperate to avoid responsibility that she was willing to publicly humiliate me on television, to paint me as a senile old woman who couldn't be trusted with her own checkbook. Would you like to see some of my financial records? I asked sweetly, to help determine if I'm competent to make my own investment decisions? Jessica looked triumphant, like I was about to hang myself with my own rope. She had no idea what I was about to show them. I went inside and returned with my laptop and a folder I'd prepared for exactly this moment. Patricia, you might want to keep that camera running for this. I opened the laptop and turned it toward them. This is my investment portfolio, managed entirely by me for the past 20 years. Current value, $4.8 million. Jessica's triumph began to falter as the numbers sank in. These are my tax returns for the past 5 years, showing consistent profitable trading and business investments. And this, I pulled out the final document with flourish, is the psychological evaluation I had done last week by Dr. Sarah Chen at Northwestern, confirming that I have no cognitive impairment whatsoever. James Morrison's confidence evaporated like morning dew. Mrs. Brennan, we were simply concerned about your welfare. Were you concerned about my welfare when your client embezzled $247,000 from her business partners? Or when she used company funds to pay for hotel rooms where she conducted her affair with Mr. Thompson here? Patricia Wells looked at her camera operator, who was still filming everything. Are you planning to interview Mr. Thompson about his role in this story? I asked innocently, because I have some very interesting documentation about their relationship that might interest your viewers. Marcus finally spoke up, his voice tight with panic. Jessica, you said this would be simple and straightforward. Shut up, Marcus, Jessica snapped, her composure cracking completely. Did you tell Mr. Thompson that your marriage was over and you were just waiting for the right time to file for divorce? I asked sweetly. Because according to my son, That conversation about ending the marriage never actually happened. Patricia Wells lowered her microphone, suddenly much less interested in this story. I think we need to verify some additional facts before we proceed with any broadcast. Jessica realized her nuclear option had just exploded in her face, leaving her more exposed than ever. 6 months later, I was sitting on my back deck watching my granddaughter Lily practice guitar while Tyler worked on homework at the patio table, both of them completely comfortable in my home in a way they'd never been when Jessica controlled their access to me. Stephen was at the grill, making dinner for our new Sunday tradition, family meals at Grandma's house where nobody got excluded for being too old or inconvenient. The business was thriving in ways it never had under Jessica's leadership. Turns out that when you remove embezzlement from your operating costs and focus on actually serving clients instead of stealing from them, profit margins improve dramatically. I'd hired an excellent general manager named Patricia Chen, no relation to Dr. Chen, and kept all the talented employees who'd been carrying Jessica's workload for years while she was busy conducting her affair. Jessica had moved to Denver with Marcus, apparently convinced that following a disgraced marketing executive across the country was better than staying in Chicago, where everyone knew exactly what kind of person he'd chosen to involve himself with. They'd lasted exactly 3 months before he'd moved on to someone without legal baggage and criminal investigations. Jessica was now working at a small agency that specialized in social media for local restaurants, a significant step down from her previous position, but probably appropriate, given her skill set and reputation. Stephen had been awarded full custody of the kids after Jessica failed to show up for 2 consecutive custody hearings, apparently too busy trying to rebuild her life in Colorado to fight for her children. The kids had adjusted to the new arrangement better than anyone expected, possibly because they were finally living in an environment where adults told the truth and kept their promises. "Grandma," Tyler called out, looking up from his algebra homework. "Mom texted again. She wants to video call tonight to talk about my birthday next month." "What did you tell her?" "That I have plans, which is true. We're finishing that 1,000-piece puzzle after dinner, and I'm not missing that for anything." Stephen looked up from the grill, his face showing the kind of peace that came from no longer living with lies and manipulation. "You don't have to avoid talking to her, buddy. I know this situation is complicated for you kids." "It's not complicated, Dad. She lied about everything important and stole money from people who trusted her. Now she's sad that there are consequences for her choices." Tyler shrugged with 13-year-old logic that cut straight to the heart of things. "Grandma taught me that actions have results, and you can't avoid results just because you don't like them." I'd found my purpose again, not as the peripheral family member grateful for whatever crumbs of attention they threw my way, but as the matriarch who set standards and maintained them. The woman who'd co-built a successful business, raised a good son despite his father's abandonment, and refused to disappear quietly when inconvenient people decided she was irrelevant to their lives. My phone buzzed with a text from David Chen, my lawyer who'd become a dear friend through all of this. "Final restitution payment processed. All clients have been fully repaid with interest." "Good news?" Stephen asked, noting my smile. "The best possible news. Justice completed, accounts balanced, and everyone made whole." As the sun set over my garden, the garden I now had time to properly tend because I wasn't spending all my energy begging for acceptance from people who'd already decided I wasn't worth their time, I thought about that photo from the yacht. 37 people who'd fit just fine without me, laughing and celebrating while I sat alone in my kitchen. I'd been devastated by my exclusion at the time, but now I understood it had been the greatest gift Jessica could have given me. Being left behind had forced me to remember who I was when I wasn't busy being who everyone else needed me to be. It had reminded me that I was a person of value independent of their approval or inclusion. Lily finished her song and looked up expectantly, her face glowing in the evening light. "How was that, Grandma? I've been practicing that piece for weeks." "Perfect, sweetheart. Absolutely perfect. And for the first time in 3 years, everything in my life truly was perfect." Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.